Just to sort of recap, for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of speaking with before, I'm Katie Vi, one of the directors of Better With Money. We're always thrilled to be able to deliver these sort of financial education workshops on behalf of the ICE Benevolent Fund and the support network. So thank you all sort of for taking the time today to be able to join us. Now, the purpose of this session is to arm you with some top tips for kind of negotiating a pay rise. Now, some of you may be in the process of actively seeking new employment, and so you're kind of having those regular conversations around remuneration. Now, for some of you, this may just act as a useful session to build your confidence sort of within your existing role and just give you some useful hints and tips around maximising your income and how best to approach any salary increase sort of requests and conversations. So just for the next sort of 20-25 minutes, some of the top tips we're going to be looking at are going to include sort of knowing your worth and building your business case, the importance of timing, practice, code of conduct, life beyond pay, seeing rejection as opportunity, and also how we can make our pay go further. So hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So starting then with our first top tip is knowing your self-worth. Now, as a consequence of the pandemic, most of us for sort of the last 2 years nearly now have been spent kind of working from home, where we perhaps missed out on that direct line management, perhaps the validation that we've needed in order to know that we're doing a good job. So before we approach our employer for a pay increase, it's really essential to spend the time sort of revisiting skill sets and the valuable contribution that you make to the business. Now, firstly, it's really important to understand where your current salary already measures against the average within the kind of industry sector. Now, there are loads of sort of free salary comparison calculators that are available online. I've provided a web link to one below from Total Jobs, and that kind of allows you to search by job title, you can look at industry, and you can also specifically look at region, so that you can then ensure that you're kind of being paid what you deserve. Now, in addition to sort of those types of tools and calculators, it's also important to consider how much demand there is for your specific role and the impact it would have the business if you were to leave. Because it goes without saying that that could give you much greater leverage when negotiating salary if you're already aware of the importance that's sitting around your current role. Now, I just touched on earlier the sort of impact that the pandemic has been having on the way in which we're working. And we also know that economically, many businesses are kind of struggling financially as a consequence of COVID. So it is really important as well to consider what this impact has been on your own employer. So, for example, if you're already kind of aware of internal restructures and redundancies that are taking place, then it's certainly wise to defer any of those conversations around salary increase until you know that the company's kind of back in a stronger position, simply because you're going to be far more likely to get a positive outcome at that point instead. So it's really about sense checking, which we will have a look at in a moment around timing, but it's sense checking, you know, how you think that conversation is also going to land with your particular employer and what they may already be going through. But like I said, there's lots and lots of fantastic resources that are available online, first of all, to really start pinpointing what your worth is and where the demand for your role currently sits. Now, once we've assessed our professional worth and we've got that kind of idea on the revised salary that we're looking for, the next top tip is to actually document the reasons why an increase to your salary is deserved. And that's where we need to be able to clearly quantify the added value that we bring to the business. Now, I've put on here around this notion of kind of creating a work journal. It's a brilliant place to start if it's something that you haven't done before. It enables you to sort of create that record of any recent training that you might have done, any qualifications that you've completed, any key achievements, all those sort of standout moments, but importantly, measurable ways around how they've benefited your employer. So formulating that maybe as an online journal makes it really easy to kind of capture any copies of feedback that you receive via email, or any kind of snapshots of performance reports that you're going to sort of be able to use to evidence your worth during those conversations. Now, when you think about the structure of any examples you're going to use, a brilliant acronym actually that I was taught to use a long time ago now for any sort of performance appraisals and certainly competency-based interviews is to structure each answer as a self-addressed envelope. Now, that's probably going to sound a little bit odd, but bear with me. So we're looking at the SAE. So the S standing for the situation, the A then stands for the action that you took, and the E is then the effect that it had. So always think self-addressed envelope, SAE, situation, action, effect. It's a really, really great structure to keep your points succinct, to avoid you going off on a tangent, or what sadly happens sort of quite a lot, where somebody actually then fails to evidence the part that they've played and the impact they've had. So sometimes we can all be guilty of giving this fantastic example of what the situation was, but we then sort of fail to specifically pull out what it was that we did and what actual positive impact that had to the business. Because ultimately, that's all we're interested in. We all know that we kind of go to work every day and we're going to be doing different activities and pieces of work. But what the business is going to be looking for is what difference that made over and above your role. So really think about that structure of self-addressed envelope, SAE, situation, action, effect, to keep it really, really specific to the example that you're giving and the impact that it's had. Now, again, we want to highlight here those skills that you possess that are in short supply or in fact could be missing in the organisation, simply because the more you can prove that you're indispensable to the business, the more likely you're going to be to actually secure that pay rise. And this is also where you need to become your own salesperson. So if you don't believe in your own value and the contribution that you're adding to the business, then it's a really tough task expecting someone else to believe in you. So that's why being able to present a strong factual log of evidence is going to act as your greatest tool here in demonstrating the value that deserves to be rewarded ultimately. So think about that work journal and think about creating that log of events to really justify why you deserve that increased salary. Now, top tip number 3 is to strike it right. Now, timing is everything. We know that money is a really, really sensitive subject. It's not something that should be discussed with colleagues or broached with your manager kind of in the middle of the office. So it's about making sure that your request for a pay increase gets the right focus and the attention it deserves by arranging a specific meeting to discuss it. So try and avoid bringing it up at the end of what's perhaps already been a lengthy one-to-one, as it can just look as if it's an afterthought. Also, some managers don't appreciate the element of surprise because it perhaps hasn't given them adequate time to prepare. So here it's really important that you think already about the character and the personality of the line manager that you're going to be having that conversation with. Obviously, that's if you do already have that rapport with them. So if you do, then it's about using your relationship with that authorising manager to influence how you're going to approach a meeting. So it may be that you already know that they're the type of person that prefer a heads up email that kind of outlines that you're going to want to discuss something with them and what that may be. You may even have the type of relationship where they can support you and advise you on how best to prepare for that meeting with them in advance, just so that maximum benefit comes from it. It may well be that when you think about it, it sort of springs to mind that giving them too much information up front isn't actually always the best approach with that type of manager. And it's actually more beneficial to sort of send a generic meeting request to them and then do your talking on the day. So it's very much around using past experience to dictate how it's going to be best to approach that subject. Now, the timing of the request is also really important to consider. So you may be privy to information already that the leadership team are under extreme pressure, perhaps from the exec board. They may be involved in some really critical projects that require all of their focus and attention. So putting them in a position where they're going to need to then run a salary review past their superiors may not go down particularly well. Now, earlier, we also touched on the economic impact that the pandemic is having on many organisations. So again, if you know that your business is about to be going through a restructure where perhaps that's going to result in a reduction to headcount, then again, it's highly unlikely that requesting a pay increase during that time is going to be well received or result in a kind of positive outcome for you. So it's really important to pitch this at the right time in order to stand the best chance. And, you know, again, only you know that. If you're somebody that's actually actively looking for roles right now and you're going through a recruiter, then actually it's good practice to have that conversation with them instead and say, look, I'm going to want to negotiate the salary. What does that kind of look like? What type of conversation have you perhaps already been privy to around that? Because the recruiter will already categorically have had that conversation with the employer, and they will know what sort of range of salary is on the table. So it's better to go through them first, because ultimately in that scenario, you haven't built any rapport at all with sort of potentially who you're going to work with. So it is all about sort of using that existing relationship if obviously it's a current place of employment. New place of employment, then you would want to be using the recruiter, or you might want to look at things like Glassdoor, where sort of perhaps existing employees of that place of employment have actually put their salaries up, and sometimes in the commentary there might be sort of some anecdotal feedback as well around how open the employer is to salary reviews, how they treat their staff, etc. So it will start to enable you to build a picture to make sure that you're striking that conversation right, and then it's going to land well. Now, it's a wise old saying, but practice makes perfect. So tip number 4 is to grab a friend or a trusted kind of colleague over a coffee and role play this out. Now, negotiating can be uncomfortable. It can make us feel incredibly nervous too, which can sometimes impair our ability to sort of express ourselves effectively. So the more we can practice, the more comfortable we're going to become, and ultimately the more skilled we actually become at doing it. So encourage your friend or whoever you're going to use to practice with to ask you deliberately challenging questions so that you can then practice giving those succinct answers. And remember here to use a framework that works for you, or the self-addressed envelope, as we went through before, so that you can run through the evidence that you've already collated in your work journal to really be able to quantify your examples. So some sort of example questions you might sort of want to be asked is things like, what level of pay rise are you looking for? And how did you get to that figure? Why do you think you deserve more money? How have you gone above and beyond your current role? And what extra responsibility would you be prepared to take on for any extra money? Now, from time to time, many of us will experience something called imposter syndrome. And for anybody who isn't familiar with this, imposter syndrome was a term that was actually first used in the 1970s. And it's where you believe that you're not as competent as others perceive you to be. So you can feel as if you don't belong where you are, or you only got that role through luck, or you only got the achievements just through sort of luck. Other characteristics can be sort of berating your own performance, putting yourselves down, self-doubt, sabotaging your own successes, maybe applying a level of humour to everything that actually you've done quite skillfully. But again, it's that way of kind of putting yourself down, and also feeling fearful perhaps that you won't live up to those expectations. Now, originally, imposter syndrome was thought to mainly apply to high achieving women, but it has now been recognised as more widely experienced. And it is estimated that 70% of people will experience at least one episode of it in their lives. So it's really important that you believe in yourselves, that you practice selling yourself, but coherently evidencing the value that you bring to the business. And whilst we're on this topic, if anybody kind of sort of this slide really resonates with them and they think, oh gosh, I have these thoughts and this imposter syndrome that crops up quite recently, and that can really make me feel quite uncomfortable about asking for more money and whether I deserve more money. And you want to have a look in more detail at sort of exploring mind management models, then I would actually highly recommend the chimp paradox model, that's actually by Professor Steve Peters. He's worked with actually lots of Olympians, so the Great British cycling team and things like that, to slightly different, but it's around talking about the chimp within and how we can kind of control that. So it's really important to have a look at these sorts of mind management models. If you are somebody that knows you can kind of sort of sometimes feel quite nervous and your thoughts can run away with you. Because certainly when we're thinking about negotiating for pay increases, we have to be able to sell ourselves. And that's the only way you're going to get somebody to believe in you, buy into you, and also recognise that success that you've had. Now, we spoke earlier. Sorry, just come backwards. We spoke earlier around kind of timing and making sure that we're striking it right. But in addition to that, it's really important that we approach the meeting as well in the right way. So if you've gone as far as successfully securing a meeting to discuss a pay rise, then there is an expectation that you are well prepared for it. So a good tip is to view it basically like a job interview. The meeting is going to be an opportunity to showcase your worth. You're going to be influencing someone's decision so that you get what you want. So we would never turn up for an interview without having spent hours on the prep. So the same level of preparation applies for any salary review meetings as well. Now, presenting your business case should only take a few minutes, so be mindful of time, but also remember to keep those answers short and precise. So again, we go back to thinking about those structures of how you're going to position your examples, and if it's helpful, keeping that SAE, that self-addressed envelope in mind, and the evidencing the impact you've made. Now, nerves do have the ability to make us overcompensate and talk too much. But when negotiating, there is a huge power that exists in silence. So once you've given your answer, you've made your point, listen to what's being said, and then use that time to think through your next response. Sometimes it's very easy for us to want to fill uncomfortable silences, but it's the worst thing to do because it actually moves the power away from yourself onto somebody else. So say what you need to say and then be quiet and allow that person, firstly, the opportunity to think about what you said, but also it allows you some prep time as well for what your next retort's going to be. Now, it's also really important to note that although the main aim of the meeting is to kind of secure a pay increase, negotiation is never one-sided. So it's really important to build rapport by appreciating the company's perspective as well, demonstrating that teamwork and acceptance where necessary. And if the business isn't in a financial position to increase salary, then it certainly isn't something to take personally, but instead it just enables you to move the conversation to a really productive place where you can try and get agreement for a review. So maybe 6 months down the line instead. It is unlikely that any company will straight away agree to your first inquest request. So it's usually always going to be a negotiation where there's going to be trade-offs or counter-offers that will also perhaps need to be considered and explored. So just make sure you're prepared for other outcomes, which we will have a look at as well in the coming slides in more detail. Now, the most important factor here is to remain professional at all times. So stick to the matter in hand, stick to the examples detailed in your business journal. It can sometimes be easy for emotion to take over, for us to sort of go off track, maybe want to start comparing ourselves to other people in the team, or bringing up kind of inside knowledge that you might have regarding someone else's sort of pay or bonus that they're awarded. But ultimately, that is the worst thing that we can do. So if you want the company to buy into you, you need to keep it about you and you only, and you want to do everything in your power to make them feel like they want you to feel valued. And that will only happen if we conduct ourselves as well in the right way. So think about that code of conduct, removing out the emotion and keeping it very, very specific to the conversation in hand. Now, on the previous slide, I just mentioned trade-offs and counteroffers, and it could be that the company isn't able to increase your salary, but they might be able to enhance your benefit package instead. So it's really important to have done your research here to see what scope there may be. Now, for some people, a change in just the job title or getting some increased responsibility can really help make a positive difference to long-term career aspirations and CV. So although it may not directly result in an increase to take-home pay, it can still help accelerate opportunities and market value elsewhere. It's also becoming increasingly popular for people to request flexible working arrangements so that some of their salary can actually be saved by cutting those commuting costs. There are also other examples of people securing home-based contracts, which has then meant they've actually been able to move to a cheaper area or buy a bigger house for their money. Additional holiday entitlement can also be a good negotiation, especially if the company give you the opportunity to sell a proportion of your holiday entitlement, because that actually can be a really tactical way to help you increase your take-home pay, but in a different way. So by selling some of that additional holiday that they've actually given you. Another area that you could look to explore is a training budget. So to pay for industry exams or other qualifications, which can help you secure a promotion and more salary down the line when it's available. It's not uncommon for businesses to award enhanced pension contributions to somebody that they either want to attract to a role or retain, as the case may be. Obviously, again, it doesn't increase your take-home pay, but it does play a significant part in funding your retirement income down the line. Company shares are also another way that companies are using to reward strong performance outside of salary reviews. And again, it can provide a fantastic sort of financial benefit that can be cashed in when the time's right. You've also got other employee benefits as well that can be looked at. So things like death in service, which is a multiple of your salary that pays out in the event of your death. It could be viable that the company offer a tiered system. So employees perhaps have, as example, 4 times their annual salary as a death in service benefit, but management tiers might actually have an increased level of 6%. So there could be scope there for the company to be able to give you an increased benefit level. When looking at other employee benefits, you know, there's things such as sort of healthcare. Again, that might be a viable option, or increased protection. So it's worth having the conversation to see what difference could be made for you. If it isn't directly salary, what difference can be made to those benefits that sit outside. And sometimes it can be much easier for your manager to get that type of sign off through HR rather than having to present a formal business case to the board for additional remuneration budget. So it can be much easier sometimes for them to use up budget from elsewhere. Like, they know that there's an excess training and development budget available, but they know that there isn't any spare budget when it comes to pay increases or bonus remuneration. So it's about tactically sort of, looking where they can still acknowledge the valuable contribution you make. They want to retain you, but it maybe just won't be through that direct pay. So always look beyond pay as part of those negotiations as well. And if you're anything like me, growing up, I heard the word no far more than I ever heard the word yes. And so in adult life, it is very natural for us to sometimes feel angry or sad and disappointed when we do receive a no to a request. But we need to really see the positives that can come from no. So it's not a word that targets you personally. It shouldn't dent your self-worth or make you feel you're not good enough. It's just somebody's way of saying they're not in a position to commit yet. And the key is in the yet. So don't sort of view it as a negative, just purely view that no as a discussion point rather than a rejection. It just simply becomes a new opportunity down the line. So sort of don't shut it down as a possibility, but just think about it with regards to next steps. So seek the clear rationale as to why. So why isn't it able to happen for you now? Formalize that personal development plan to proactively work on those highlighted areas and agree a review date to then revisit your progress against those areas. Now, remember to continue your business journal so that you can continue to evidence and provide data to show your achievements against the progress you're making. Have that development plan in place to support your job growth by enabling you to build on more skills, expand your expertise, and also strengthen your career elevation. So it's going to put you in the strongest position for any promotions when they become apparent. And consider asking your boss to act as your mentor, or if not your boss, another key stakeholder in the business. That's going to ensure that you're listening and learning from key influencers, and that's only ever going to work in your favor. So you're going to be getting them on side, and they're going to want to do everything they can to help your career development. It may be that there's no further scope within your current department, so you could ask whether the business could maybe support a secondment or a promotion outside of your department. And lastly, if kind of all avenues have been exhausted and you don't feel that there's any commitment being given to support your desire to kind of enhance your career and salary, then it may be time to leave. And it is about kind of thinking about maybe getting your worth elsewhere and outside of your organisation. The last tip that I just kind of wanted to finish on is just to share with you all one that we can all do really easily to create our own pay increase now. And there is this misconception that if we just earned more money, then all of our financial stress would disappear. But in reality, it doesn't actually matter how much we earn if we aren't managing our cash flow effectively and monitoring what we spend on a monthly basis. So the question I want to kind of ask you is, how often do you review your spending habits? When was the last time you challenged yourself to see if you can actually make your own pay go further? And starting with a kind of monthly budget will help you capture all of your expenditure in one place. You can then go through that budget planner, which we have available on the Better With Money website, which you're welcome to use, and you challenge yourself to see what costs you can reduce. So have a look at all those direct debits and standing orders. What out of those do you really need? Are there any you can cancel and cut? When did you last review your insurances? And also think about all of those other quick win costs too. So food planners, shopping online, bringing those costs right down. Now I've detailed here some of the sort of useful websites to be able to have a look at those to negotiate sort of some pay increases, but also have a look at benchmarking your own salary and see what other opportunities perhaps exist out there. And lastly, we've just got the details of the ICE BEM Fund and Support Network, who've obviously sponsored the website webinar today. Sadly, they aren't there to give you all a pay increase, but they can provide invaluable kind of financial workplace and wellbeing support to help you and your families. So I put their website and numbers there. I'm conscious there's probably going to be some questions, and I'm conscious of time. I'm just going to hand back over to Sarah so that she can list off any that we have there. So Sarah, have we got any that are coming through?
Thank you very much, Katie. We've had a great number of questions, so we may have to address some of those in a document outside of this webinar, but we can send that to all delegates afterwards. First of all, what would be the best approach if you don't know your line manager's approach and style? You were mentioning at the beginning about discussing pay. If you've got a new line manager, what would be your recommendations here?
It would just be to kind of get that meeting diarised. Obviously, give the heads up so that they've got as much information around that you want to have a conversation around your remuneration, and then go from there. Sadly, if it's a new line manager, you haven't already kind of got that gut feel. So it's just about biting the bullet and getting that meeting in the diary and see what comes from it.
Brilliant, thank you. And some companies set employees' pay based on a benchmark. For example, employees at the same level get paid the same. Is it normal to negotiate salary above this benchmark?
Yeah, I'm always a big fan. If you don't ask, you don't get. So I actually had this similar question come up with regards to civil service, where they actually operate on a kind of quite a sort of formalised structure. But again, if you don't ask the question, and then you're never going to get. So it's always well worth having the question. But the key thing is to really ask yourself as well, what have I done above and beyond that framework? Because if you already think, well, actually, when I think about it, I am just doing what all my colleagues are doing in line with that framework, then obviously the likelihood is you're not going to get a pay increase anyway. So what we're looking for in that example is that exceptional level of performance where you've gone above and beyond, and you can demonstrate that you are actually performing to a higher bracket.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got one delegate who says that they are on a graduate scheme at a large company that advertises biannual salary reviews whilst on the programme. Should they expect a negotiation, or is it likely that there is a set progression in pay?
Yeah, you do need to be really careful. If there has already been an upfront kind of expectation set around when salary increases are discussed, then that does become your framework. So when we spoke about timing is everything, that's where you need to use that intellectual capital. And then obviously, as and when that date comes round, you want to be, prepared with all your evidence, ready to be able to have that conversation. If you don't feel that that conversation has tactically taken place, and instead of it being a salary review, that's kind of not been mentioned, then obviously don't be fearful to kind of bring that up and hold the business to account that actually there should be these salary reviews, which was part of the graduate scheme. But yeah, be careful asking for pay increases kind of inside when an expectation has already been set. The same goes for anybody who's just been given a pay increase. So if you've already just negotiated, be very careful not to kind of, request again too quickly, because that can be perceived quite negatively as well with an employer.
That's great. And we've got time for one more. Someone has asked should we not mention that we know what others are paid, even if it is more than us, but do the same work or the same quality, in brackets, or worse, or don't do as many extra things to help the company as you?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because it's always a very difficult one in workplaces, because people are having their own kind of, negotiation conversations. So sometimes over a coffee, it can come to light somebody got a bigger bonus than somebody's got a different salary. However, it always lands badly, always, with a manager, if that is kind of brought up, that it's a known fact. So there is this kind of unwritten rule that really employees shouldn't be discussing salary and so forth. We know the reality is people do. but there's a very tactical way of how you get around that. So my advice would be never to say that you actually know of people who get paid more, etc., but instead just keep it very specific to yourself and outline your own evidence, your own example of standout moments where you have gone above and beyond the role, and then simply ask the question of the manager, how do other people go around negotiating their salaries? And also, are there any examples where people are being paid over and above the benchmark? It's up to your manager then whether they choose to answer that or not. The likelihood is they may say no, but again, you keep it specific, but I would avoid saying, I know X, Y, and Z all are paid more than me, because then you've moved the conversation away from your own strong performance, and it basically just looks as if you're asking for the sake of other people. So just always keep it specific to your own successes and keep pushing forward with why you deserve to be paid more.